What I wanted to do with the New Vision series was I wanted to bring people in who had never written for orchestra. A lot of them had written a lot of music, but they had never done it for orchestra. And we also wanted to broaden the orchestra's repertoire, so we made it clear we weren't looking for classical people. We were looking for people from other genres to come and write for orchestra. We've had, even in this series of commissions we've done, we've had a lot of people write pieces for themselves as soloists. So we've had a lot of experience with the soloist playing a piece that he or she has written, and then, you know, stopping to listen to the orchestra for a bit to see how everything is sounding.
One aspect of you know, being a performing composer is, of course, your head is kind of spinning. You're trying to figure out how to kind of adjust your playing and listen to everybody in the orchestra as you do that. And I give myself a fair amount of improvisation. I'm kind of cutting in and out of weaving my part in and out of actually playing stuff that I'm pretty clear about I'm going to play, and then stuff that in the spur of the moment could change. So, and that's what I like to do whenever I write stuff, is to kind of have that open space for me to take off on. But there are sections, especially in the first movement, that really kind of has a classical fugue-like quality. It goes between different time signatures at one point in the first movement, which creates kind of a level of excitement. And then in the second movement, it's a little bit slower, has a beautiful melody. Again, this one draws definitely from classical music, has kind of an oboe counter melody to my melody. And then in the end of that, surprisingly, it kind of jumps into like almost like a funk R&B type of groove. And that segues straight into what is the third movement. And the third movement is really a hoedown, integrating bluegrass, fiddle music, bridging a little bit with kind of a funk thing. And then it all ends in a boogie-woogie. But the key thing here is, you know, integrating the melody, the key melody for each movement, and integrating, you know, all the sort of genres into something that hopefully makes sense. So.
And all the more difficult in a jazz piece because you have such a wide variety of approaches amongst the people in the orchestra to everything. I mean, just the basic notion of rhythm is really different for. I know from doing a lot of pieces with jazz players and symphony orchestra that just the whole approach to rhythm is pretty fundamentally different, and so making everything come out together is already a challenge. One of the harder things to get a classically trained American orchestra to do is to play like Americans. I mean, I find this in the American classic composers, if you will, Bernstein and Copland and people like that. The phrases just leap to life if you just play like Americans. You try and you put aside some of your European training.
You know, when I sometimes see orchestras, and I grew up in Europe, grew up in Denmark, I went to see the Berlin Philharmonic, you know, and it's interesting how the conducting style is even more extreme in terms of setting the beat, and then the orchestra comes quite far after.
I guess a long time after.
And I can't imagine if you were this piece of music, how that would work with, say, the Berlin. I mean, they're obviously incredible players, but how would it work in terms of functionally kind of making that?
I have had the pleasure of teaching various American jazz type pieces to European orchestras, and it is quite the struggle. There are always things about the rhythm that have to be felt rather than just reading what's on the page.
Yeah,
and we do a lot of jazz because we like the music for one thing, but also because whenever we survey our audience, the number one thing they like is classical, and the number two thing they like is jazz. And so we never get any pushback from our audience, no matter how much jazz we put on our concerts, because they love classical and love jazz. And that's how you get programs that have a jazz violin concerto and Haydn Mass on the same program.
I mean, that was kind of my approach too in writing this piece. I really wanted to integrate the orchestra in the jazz tradition, in the rhythms, be kind of the backbone of the orchestra, be the backbone of the rhythm, and that's. You know, that's what's challenging because, you know, as we discussed earlier, you have people there that are more versed in the classical tradition. So to kind of get that in, of course, it makes it a lot easier if you have four guys who you play with every day, and then you have them, and then the orchestra is in the back. Sure, that works, and that's the learning curve is going to be cut short. The challenge is the other part, which I enjoy and have enjoyed. You know, I mean, making this happen. Also, kind of seeing what's possible and what's not possible. You know, kind of thing. You know.
this is your first time writing for orchestra, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is. And so it would be interesting to hear just how you approached writing for a lot of instruments when you're used to dealing with things on smaller numbers of people. And I know a lot of jazz composers you can just suggest to your colleague what you want them to do in a given piece of music.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to spend so much time writing things down and trying to make it really clear what you want them to do. So that's very different with an orchestra. So what did you do to get there?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You can't just go in bar 10, go and change that note in the oboe, because before, I mean, we only have very limited rehearsal time. So that's exactly, I mean, you have to be, I think, my approach was you have to be very organized.
Mm-hmm.
I have to know exactly going into it what I have, make the parts as clear as possible.
It's always the case.
And so that's really key. But I mean, the process for me, actually in some ways to start with, wasn't much different than if I wrote for my own band. I went to the piano, worked out melodies, worked out chords, worked out kind of a structure of the piece, the form, some of those basic things that really comes first. And once I had that, then I went out and said, I need to figure out how to orchestrate. So I got the Samuel Adler orchestration book, which is about 1,000 pages long, and you kind of, now they also have music examples, so you can actually hear everything along with it. And then I had the wonderful tutor, John Kendall Bailey, to assist me, who was really a great help. Could kind of say, yeah, this is going to work here, or have you considered that here? And
right.
I got a pivot screen. I normally have a screen that's like that, and now it's like this.
Yes.
So I was able to see, 29 instruments kind of going down through. So some of those things worked out pretty well. And I was using Sibelius, which is kind of like cheating, because the old guys like Haydn and Mozart, they didn't have the playback.
Yes.
And now I was like, oh, I can listen back to everything, and if it doesn't sound good, I'll change a few things, right?
And there's a learning curve during rehearsal.
Yes.
You just have to adjust things. Everybody has to adjust dynamics up and down and everything to get everything to balance.
Exactly.
Because once you have actual human beings playing, it's different
Yeah,
than whatever you theoretically thought was going to happen.
Right. It's going to sound 100 times better than anything a
Right.
machine could do. It's definitely been a very interesting process and fun process too. And I remember like the last bit of work where it's basically just busy work, making the parts. I remember working for 16 hours straight, not sleeping at all, working through the night and getting it all done. So it had a little bit of drama there to get it done before the deadline. But we got it done, and I was really glad to have this opportunity, really.
The great thing about bringing a piece to life for the first time is that you hear it, you hear the thing being born, and so you do want to just sit and listen for a bit. But when you're actually putting it together, you can't do that. You have to focus on putting it together.
Yeah.
So you look forward to actually performing it, where you just go through and you actually hear it.
Exactly.
One thing after the other. So
Yeah.
that's always a great part of this process.
Yeah, that's the big reward in the end, and then
Exactly.
you actually get to play it and get to have people enjoy it, hopefully, and a beautiful hall. I mean, so yeah, no, it's really a neat thing about it, and of course, it feels funny that you worked on such a thing for, say, 4 months, and all of a sudden, boom, 25 minutes,
gone.
and that's
Yes.
it, and that's it. That's but that's part of it, but makes you appreciate it even more, I guess. So I've kind of worked my way up to now writing for the biggest, you could say, of instruments, or biggest of ensembles, the symphony orchestra. And I really, after this experience, feel like I have a lot more that I would like to do for that. I didn't necessarily think about that 4 years ago, but it does seem like it's a great opportunity, especially with what I do, which is kind of adding an unusual twist now. Of course, symphony orchestras have a lot of string players, and if you're not a string player, it's one of those instruments that is quite tricky to write for. So I kind of enjoy having that sort of background. I know how to write for violins and violas and cellos. Integrating some of these techniques like shuffle bow, which is from bluegrass music, integrating some of these phrasings that you find in jazz in string players, being able to talk a little bit about that to get everybody on the same page, and then you can actually have you know, an orchestra that's not necessarily used to playing jazz and fiddle music, but being able to deliver on that after a few rehearsals because of sort of my unique background with that. And I feel like that's something I can take a lot further going forward and play this piece with other orchestras, but also writing more pieces.
And to me, the whole notion of music that is locally written, you know, it's like almost like the food movement, the locally sourced music.
Waters.
Is really important because it changes the way audiences look at new music. As if it was written by someone who literally lives down the street, they approach it a whole different way than if it's someone who flew in from New York or someplace else and wrote a contemporary piece.
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of takes the music into the scene by saying, oh, the guy lives 10 minutes away down the street.
He wrote this piece.
Yeah, yeah, I know.